Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today, we have a big show for you. As promised, we are going to get into a little bit of fantasy football previews as the NFL season is just 9 days away. So we're going to start off with one of the most important position, arguably the most important position, the wide receivers. I have for you today my top 24 fantasy receivers, as well as a couple of honorable mentions. We'll start off the show with that. It also is cut day in the NFL. If we have time, we will get to all of the cuts, some of the big names that are no longer on NFL rosters, as well as an update with some other wide receiver rankings. It is a big wide receiver show today, taking a look at some more CeeDee Lamb conversations and some Ja'Marr Chase updates. But before we get into all of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to start off our show today with some fantasy football rankings. I have for you right there on the screen my top 24 receivers, and we are going to go through each and everyone. But before we get to the top 24, I do have a couple of honorable mentions to add. We'll start off, you know what? Actually, we're going to start off at number one because it's already up there for you. My number one receiver is Tyreek Hill. And I know there's been a lot of discussion in this offseason for who the fantasy wide receiver one is going to be. It's a virtual 1A, 1E, 1B between Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb, the two top wide receivers on my list. Makes it a little bit easier now that CeeDee Lamb has signed his contract. You no longer have to worry about whether or not he will be, playing the whole season. But I have Tyreek Hill ahead of him because if there's any receiver in the NFL that is going to reach 2,000 yards, it's going to be Tyreek Hill. He was flirting with that number last season. There's no reason to believe he won't be at least flirting with that 2K number again this year. Not much has changed with the Miami offense. The situation should be relatively the same. Look for Tyreek Hill to have a huge, huge season. He is my wide receiver one. We talked a little bit about CeeDee Lamb there. He is my wide receiver too. Again, 1A, 1B situation with Tyreek Hill. CeeDee Lamb is going to be the entirety of that high-powered Cowboys offense. He's probably going to have the most touchdown value, so maybe he will have the ability to jump total fantasy points-wise over a guy like Tyreek Hill. But in terms of volume, I still have Tyreek Hill above him. At 3, I have Amon-Ra St. Brown. He broke out. Not that he didn't break out before, but he really broke out last season, finishing in the top 10 for fantasy points. He has only steadily improved in every single year. He signed a huge contract at one point this offseason, making him the highest paid receiver in the entire league. No longer is there with the explosion of the wide receiver market, but Amon-Ra St. Brown at number 3 on the list here, he should improve. Again, still have Jared Goff. That offense is going to be great. This is the number one. He plays in the slot too, and you don't have the best cover corner in the slot barely ever. So he's going to get favorable matchups almost every time he's out there. He's my number 3 receiver. At number 4 and 5, we have another tie between Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase. I put Justin Jefferson ahead of Ja'Marr Chase because, as we'll talk about later on in this show, I'm not 100% sure that Ja'Marr Chase will play every single game. Outside of that, Ja'Marr Chase has a better quarterback situation, so he's going to be more likely to get those big plays, but they also might force feed Justin Jefferson. We saw what happened when Nick Mullins was in charge of the offense. He was just feeding the ball to Justin Jefferson the whole time. I don't expect that to change with Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold might not force it into triple coverage to Justin Jefferson, but he's still going to get his lion's share of targets. He was just paid. He's the highest paid non-quarterback in the history of the NFL. The Vikings aren't going to suddenly stop throwing to him. He is a safe floor option for one of these top receivers. Again, Jamar Chase at 5, just because we're not 100% sure if he's going to play week 1, and losing an extra week out of a guy is not something you want when you're playing fantasy. That's one of the biggest red flags. At number 6, I have Garrett Wilson. And Garrett Wilson is a guy that I was really high on last year. We saw a little bit of his connection with Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers famously loves his wide receiver ones. You remember in Green Bay, Devontae Adams for a little bit, Jordy Nelson for a little bit. Whoever was his wide receiver one was consistently top ranks in fantasy. And even without Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson still manages to put up 1,000 yards every year. He's coming off of an offensive rookie of the year season just 2 years ago. And then he has to come in and play with Zach Wilson, play with, not a good quarterback play. And he's still able to put up 10 points a game in fantasy, which if you're starting a guy, I think that should be the baseline. He puts up 10 points a game. That was with no touchdown volume and with Zach Wilson. Imagine how much better he's going to be if he has Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball, even if it isn't peak Aaron Rodgers. Garrett Wilson is my number 6 receiver. Those are the 6 guys that I think have the ability to be the number 1 overall receivers, that top 6. As we get down to the next row, 7 to 12, finishing out the number 1 receiver area, these are guys that I think are going to be really good, are going to be really consistent, but I don't think these guys are going to be competing for that number 1 overall wide receiver spot in terms of fantasy points. So that's where I'm drawing my distinction between this top 6 and the rest of the list. But as we get to the back half, the low tier wide receiver ones, we're starting off with A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown, leader of the Eagles, just signs a massive $30 million extension of his own, making him one of the top 5 highest paid receivers in the league. Him and Devonta Smith, who's later on this list, have continued to be productive even though they're side by side, and the passing lane should open up more for them with the addition of Saquon Barkley. And that might sound a little bit backwards, right? Because you bring in an elite running back like Saquon, that should take away opportunities. But the play action game is going to be much better. That's going to get them more open. Jalen Hurts, he's a great quarterback. He had a little bit of a down year, especially down the stretch. But these guys should continue to be great. A.J. Brown especially. At number 8, we have Devontae Adams. And you're looking at the rest of the guys on this list and you're saying, oh, these guys are all in pretty good offenses, pretty good situations. Devontae Adams, not quite. But what makes me put Devontae Adams up this high is his quarterback. Gardner Minshew, for all of his flaws, does one thing awesome for fantasy wide receivers, and that is he feeds his number 1. You remember just back to last season with Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman finished outside of the top 12 in wide receivers, but he had an explosive year, earning himself a nice contract in Indianapolis, and a lot of that was because of Gardner Minshew. Gardner Minshew last year targeted Pittman 30% of the time. That is the highest target share in the entire league. He force feeds his wide receivers. Absolutely loves throwing to his wide receiver ones. Devontae Adams is going to be open. He is going to get the ball. He is going to get a lot of targets, and he is going to score a lot of points. That is why he is sitting here in the top 10 for me at number 8. At number 9, we have Mike Evans. Mr. Consistency, right? 10 years in the NFL, 10 years with 1,000 yards. He had an explosive end of the season with Baker Mayfield. Their connection just continues to grow. Mike Evans is my number 9 receiver. And rounding out the top 10, I have Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison is a rookie, but he is heading into an offense where there isn't really a lot else out there. A lot of people are high on Trey McBride. But Kyler Murray, the last time he had a true alpha number 1 receiver was DeAndre Hopkins. And he played 31 games with DeAndre Hopkins. In those 31 games, if you go by a per game status, he was getting just over 6 catches a game, just about 80 yards. It was 78.8 yards a game there. So that's 6 for 80, and he scored a touchdown in 17. He scored 17 touchdowns. So basically a touchdown every other game. So you look at that fantasy points wise, every game in a PPR setting, you're expecting 13 points at a minimum. Every other game, you're getting 20. That is a great, great spot to be. Kyler Murray is going to feed his number one. Marvin Harrison, by all accounts, is going to be amazing. He is my number 10 receiver. At 11, I have Drake London. Another situation where a guy might be a little bit unproven due to the fact that he's had bad quarterback play. Kirk Cousins, again, we saw it with Justin Jefferson, and Drake London isn't at Justin Jefferson level. But what Drake London does do really good is get open, and he's a good jump ball receiver. Kirk Cousins is going to find him. He's the number one there. Also look for Kyle Pitts to have a big upside. We'll talk about tight ends later on in the week. But I think Drake London should have a very productive season. I have him up at 11. And rounding out the top 12, my wide receiver ones is Puka Nacua. And I know that's lower than a lot of people have Puka in this league. I personally, in this year in draft settings, I personally am a lot lower on Puka than a lot of other guys. For the main reason being Cooper Kupp, who's also on this list later on, and we'll get to him probably in the next segment, is back. And in the couple of games that Puka Nacua was playing with Cooper Kupp just last season, his point production in a PPR setting went down 33%. He scored 33% less points with Cooper Kupp on the field. And Cooper Kupp is going to be 100% healthy this year. There are plenty of receivers that I love ahead of Puka Nacua. He should still be a great receiver. You put those values out, he still has 1,300 yards, right? This isn't going to be an issue. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua play very similar roles in the offense. It's going to depend which one defenses focus on more. If they focus more on Cooper Kupp, Puka should be the main guy. If they focus more on Puka, then the main guy is going to be Cooper Kupp. This is going to be the main question when we're talking about a Rams offense where both of these guys should be good. I just have him slipping a little bit because I don't think he'll be that same dominant force that he was without Cooper Kupp in the lineup. But let me know what you think of my wide receiver ones. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we'll go through the rest of the list, my reasonings for it, and where we have some honorable mentions at the end of wide receiver 2. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.